come back to the topic of organ transplantation. Last time, we have get familiar with the topic and some related information, and we also analyzed the structure of the text. Now it's time for us to move on to the next part, text analysis. As we have talked about last time, the whole passage is divided into 3 parts. The first part is about the general situation in the US. The first paragraph of part 1 centers on the public discussions about the ethics of organ transplantation. So the first ethical discussion is about the human significance of removing organs from both living and cadaveric donors. The second discussion is about the criteria for determining when death occurs and when the dissident organs might be taken. The third discussion is about whose wishes should decide whether organs are used or not. The last kind of discussion is about the ethics of different organ procurement and allocation laws. The second paragraph focuses on the significance of the 2 laws in shaping the current organ policy. Still remember the 2 laws? Yes, they are UAGA and NOTA. The significance of the laws first lies in the fact that they may help people to reap the medical benefits of organ transplantation. They may encourage individuals to become organ donors. They can also preserve limits against treating the body as property. And they ensure that the organs are allocated in an equitable way. The third paragraph talks about the dilemma of the current organ policy, whether it is a great success or terrible failure. On the one hand, many lives do have been saved that would not have been saved in other ways. On the other hand, the waiting list for organs continues to increase, and it seems hopeless for some people. So what is the reason behind? Maybe at present, nobody can give a definite answer. In paragraph 3, we have 2 difficult sentences to deal with. The first is as the following. Many individuals have given themselves, literally, to save the life of another, and yet the unequivocal protection of those who are not yet dead, but would be useful if they were, has been called into question. Here in this sentence, we have a phrase, call something into question. It means to cast doubt on something. So for your better understanding, we may make a sentence with it. They didn't want to do anything that could call into question their talent. That means they didn't want anyone to doubt their talent because of anything they might do. Let's get back to the sentence itself. It has 2 coordinate clauses connected by and. The second clause is a little longer. Its subject is the unequivocal protection of those, followed by a relative clause introduced by who. So the sentence means many people have actually donated their organs to save other people. However, questions remain about the best way to protect those who are close to death. And protection is necessary because the person's death will benefit others through transplanted organs. The second difficult sentence in paragraph 3. The human body, dead or alive, has not been reduced to mere property, and yet the desperation of watching thousands of individuals die every year while waiting for organs has promoted a renewed debate about whether monetary incentives should be used in an effort to increase organ supply. Just like the first difficult sentence, there are also 2 coordinate clauses. The second clause has a long subject, which is the desperation of watching thousands of individuals die every year while waiting for organs, with desperation as the center word. The object is also a bit complex. Its center word is debate, and the whether introduces a clause to modify debate. So this sentence means the human body cannot be considered as property. However, we feel despair when we notice many people die every year while waiting for suitable organs. So this situation has aroused a debate about whether money could be given to donors in order to increase the organ supply. The last paragraph of Part 1, paragraph 4, mainly presents us with the current tendency of promoting donation. A number of bills are made to promote organ donation and increase organ supply. Numerous books and articles are written to claim a market-based system to solve the problem of organ supply. A new group named Life Sharers tries to develop a private network of organ giving and receiving. And the American Society of Transplant Surgeons supports a pilot program to partially reimburse the surviving families of people who allow their organs to be taken after death. So the 4 paragraphs of Part 1 represent different aspects of the general situation of organ transplantation in the US. After presenting the general situation about organ transplantation in the US in the previous part, the author turns to the human context for considering organ transplantation in the second part. So before considering the moral arguments for and against different organ procurement policies, one must first consider the human context and human meaning of organ transplantation. The first is the dignity and integrity of the human body. That is, our humanity and identity are inseparable from our bodies. The second context for understanding organ transplantation is the obligations and limits of medicine. We have reaped great good from both lives saved and suffering reduced. At the same time, we cannot ignore the great suffering because of organ shortage. Meanwhile, the obligation to heal exists in concert and in conflict with other human values, so such as the principle of autonomy, the duty of families to mourn the deceased, and the responsibility of doctors to do no harm even when very great good might come from it. So here comes the third difficult sentence. If saving the most possible lives while inflicting the least harm on the living was the only significant human obligation, then our policy on organ transplantation, not to mention human experimentation, would be very different. So in this sentence, we have a phrase, inflict on, which means to make someone suffer by imposing an unpleasant sentence. For example, that pitiful man inflicted a great deal of suffering on his wife and the children. So at the beginning of the sentence, if introduces an adverbial clause of condition, and the main clause is our policy on organ transplantation would be very different. So this sentence means if the only criteria for our actions were to save the maximum amount of people through the minimum amount of harm to the living, then our policy on organ transplantation would be different, and human experimentation would also be different. In addition to the problems discussed in the previous paragraphs, many further questions are raised in paragraph 8 to arouse people's awareness of the complexity of organ transplantation, such as, are there legitimate moral reasons not to be an organ donor or not to allow the organs of a deceased loved one to be taken? Since there are some questions unsolved when it comes to organ transplantation, can we find some policies to govern the whole process of organ transplantation during its implementation? Let's turn to the third part of the passage, organ transplantation and public policy. So the third part begins with 3 caveats. First, it is impossible to separate the ethical political debate over cadaveric organs from the debate over living organ donations. Second, it is not easy in practice to separate the debate over organ procurement from the debate over organ allocation. Third, many proposed policies are untested hypotheses, and we should not simply refuse or accept them. Here, in paragraph 9, we meet another long sentence. Proposals to compensate individuals for providing organs potentially entail their right to sell their organs to the highest bidder. Here we have a word entail. It means to make it necessary to do something. Now let's look at a sentence with it. This complex plan for rescuing the old man entails great risks. That means there will be great risks because of the procedures in rescuing the old man. In this sentence, the subject is proposals with a to phrase as its modifier. Intel is a predicate, and the object is their right with another to phrase as a modifier. So the whole sentence means the proposals to compensate organ donors could lead to organ donors selling their organs to those who gave the highest price. Then, because of the problems mentioned in organ procurement in paragraph 9, different principles that might govern an organ procurement were presented in paragraph 10. So they are giving and receiving, taking and getting, selling and buying, honoring and sharing, and compensating and providing. It is advised that we should think about the meaning of organ transplantation in its fullness and face the moral costs and benefits of different policies. By the way, here in text A, the 5 principles are only explained a little bit. And if you want to get an overall picture of the 5 principles, you may go on to read text B, in which they are elaborated and compared in detail. Well, based on the discussions about the different systems and principles, the following 2 paragraphs, paragraph 11 and 12, bring us 3 policies that are not acceptable to American people, which include policies of organ conscription or mandatory organ retrieval, unrestricted autonomy, and state-mandated protection of the inviolability of all bodies. In this way, people may find out the most responsible and prudent policy. So at the end of the passage, the author emphasizes his vision of the future of organ transplantation on policies. That is, by seeing the error of current policies, it is likely that we are awakened to the challenge of making a policy or preserving the existing policy that is both more moderate and more sober. Okay, we've briefly gone through the whole passage and have a general picture of the organ transplantation issues. So that's all about the analysis of the text. Let's just stop here and see you next time.